Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Well, let's see here. Hello, everyone. This is Mike. Welcome to Men Without a Nation. It was just I haven't streamed for a few weeks, and so I figured today would be a good time to do that, just to keep a presence online. You can, I'm not going to go over all the places you can find me, or me and John, more accurately. Um, But I guess I'll plug the blog, menwithoutanation.blogspot.com. You can find us on Instagram, Men Without a Nation, and of course here on YouTube. So this is a little bit of a departure from our usual content. Um, since my background uh, is varied, and I've done quite a few things in my life. But one of the things I've done recently is I've retooled myself in recent years, and I learned a great deal about permaculture. Um, one of this permaculture, for those who don't know, is a design methodology for creating resilient systems of production, and that can be applied to nearly any aspect of anything from business to home organization, community organization, to, well, more commonly, landscape and property organization. And so today, I just was going to go over some of the just fundamental basics of the ethics behind that undergird permaculture, as well as the 12 principles that are used in the design process. This is going to be a very high overview. Probably is going to take about half hour, 45 minutes to get through all of it. And then in later streams, I will go into depth more in each of the categories, using examples from designs that I've done, using examples from some of the larger names in the industry, um, just to give you all a better idea about what it is and how to use it for yourselves. Um, the reason I'm doing this is, and it is a bit of a departure from the usual content that we put out. The reason being is that in all of the nonsense that is modern life, um, a person can very quickly get bogged down with all of the negativity. But without any sort of positive things that you can focus on, or things that you can um, put your energy into to make things better, um, it can very quickly lead to despair. And I don't want that to happen to people who tune in or are following us, in any way, shape, or form. And so, without further ado, let's get right into it. I've never used the thumbnail option before, and so I have no idea what, if there's a thumbnail up or what have you. I'm guessing, because I'm seeing a blank screen, that the thumbnail didn't work. So I'm just going to pull up what I was using for that. Let's see here, and permaculture ethics and principles. Let's see here. Badoop. This will work. Let me just share that here. Badoop. And, well, I don't want you guys to be seeing that. Let's see here. Please forgive my Luddite nature here. There we are. Okay. So, a bit of the background of permaculture. Two gentlemen, permaculture creators. Bill Mollison, that's the name, David Holmgren and Bill Mollison, put together this system of ecological design over the course of many years of studying nature and its systems, and studying sustainable communities, worldwide through history and such. And they came up with these ethics and principles for intentional, sort of this intentional design process for creating resilient systems. The three core permaculture ethics are care of the earth, care of people, and return of surplus, also known as fair share. It's earth care, people care, fair share. It's kind of just more of a I think David Holmgren came up with that triptych there. It kind of rolls off the tongue a bit better than care of earth, care of people, return of surplus. But that's those are the basic ethics right there. And so first and foremost, the idea is taking care of the planet, taking care of the environment is the most important thing. Now, as a Christian, I kind of beg to differ on this one, but it's okay. We all can agree to disagree on these things. The men who came up with the system were not Christian. They were, green activists, eco freaks. I shouldn't say eco freaks, but you get the idea. Very environmentally conscious. And so care of the earth. Anyone who just takes a look at the basic situation on the ground, so to speak, would come to the conclusion that taking care of the earth is of utmost and foremost importance. If you take care of the earth, everything else follows from this. If you don't take care of the earth, there's nothing. There's no production to take care of people or give the fair share to those involved, and so it's the cornerstone of the ethics. The second ethic, care of people, just that's pretty self-explanatory. Help people get what they need and set things up with people in mind. This isn't a completely permaculture. One of the things that sort of drew me to it was that it wasn't just ecology for the sake of ecology. It wasn't designed for the sake of simply preserving the planet or simply preserving the earth, preserving ecosystems. It was about taking care of people. And so people are a very real component of everything that permaculture is and seeks to do. And so care of people is foundational. If it's not taking care, if it's not caring for people, it's not permaculture. If it's not caring for the earth, it's not permaculture. And then finally, fair share or return of surplus, meaning that it's think of it as reinvestment. anything above and beyond what is produced by the system to take care of the earth and take care of people is then returned into the system to make the system more resilient and more prosperous. That's pretty explanatory. So, first, design principle. And bear in mind, permaculture is at its heart a design methodology. It's not a religion. It's not a way of life. It's not a philosophy. It's a design methodology. Now, although there's some philosophy attached to it, that's not the heart of what it is. It is a practical design system. And so the first tent principle is observe and interact. So that actually comes from Bill Mollison's work as a college man, going to, I believe it was Tasmania. He's an Aussie, and so I'm not sure if he's alive anymore. And so he went to Tasmania and he observed these ecological systems in place that were just very resilient, very beautiful, incredibly wonderful. And he thought, well, if this can happen just sort of by accident, people can do better. And so in a way, he's right about that. But that realization came from observation. One of the, and this is part of the design methodology that will come in a different stream, but observation, part of every permaculture system includes leaving part of the system completely wild and untouched so that observation can take place. It's what's his name? Jeff Lawton. Let me pull him up. Jeff Lawton. Jeff Lawton's a really, really cool guy. I got my permaculture design. There he is with his daughter. Just let you kind of look through this stuff right here. I took an online permaculture design course from him, and incredibly, all he has done is followed what Bill Mollison has laid out. He's innovated a little bit on the way, but he's still learning from what Bill Mollison did many years ago. So he hasn't tried to reinvent the wheel, he's just followed the plan. That's one thing that I admire about him incredibly, is that he applies the principles, but he doesn't try to do anything fancy. The book, let's see here. Permaculture design. Doop. Oh, come on. Designer's manual. There it is. The old black book of permaculture. This manual is comprehensive. And it's not comprehensive in every single technique that you can use, but it's comprehensive in terms of the basic structure of laying out a permaculture system in any of the diverse climates on Earth. And so I say this because Jeff Lawton, he hasn't deviated from it, and he's doing everything he's touched is doing great. It's doing really well. Um, and the course that I took, it was incredible. That was the second one that I had taken. I'd taken another one in person by from a gentleman named Toby Hemingway. Uh, this guy right here. Um, he died a few years ago from cancer, but he made a great book. Guy's Garden, Guide to Home Scale Permaculture. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right. No, come on now. No, 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 no. That's a bunch of lame sauce that happened. Let's see if this will do that. Okay, here we are. I highly recommend this book to anybody who's wanting to get into this, because people like Jeff Lawton, he's working with hundreds of acres. People, another big guy, Sepulcher. This guy right here. He has a property that's called the Krameterhof in the Swiss Alps. And so, I mean, he's acres and acres and acres. Toby brought it down to home scale, urban lot size. And so it's more within reach for the average person. Um, so, but they all have the same thing in common: observe and interact. Observe and interact. That's all that you want to do. As the first step, observe what nature's doing, interact with it, learn from it. Okay. Second principle: catch and store energy. We all know, I mean, at least anyone with basic science learning in from grade school, um, knows knows about energy, right? And so this right here, this rock is it's stored energy. It's potential energy. Um, and if that rock is moved, there's going to be a tremendous amount of energy released, and it's going to do something. Let's see here. I live in Washington State. Grand Coulee Dam is one of the hydroelectric dams in the state. It's located on the eastern side, and it is putting into practice caught and stored energy. All this water here that's backed up behind the dam is stored energy, and then it is tapped into as it's released across the dam. These are things, and then let's see one more example. Solar power system. You know, the sun hits the solar panels, it goes into the inverter, there should be some batteries in here, but then it goes to the meter, it goes back to into the grid, it's captured, it's stored, it's released. Okay. Catching and storing energy is it makes the energy available for later use. The more energy you have stored in a system, the more resilient the system is. Okay, moving on. Obtain a yield. Again, going back to the core ethics. If one cannot obtain a yield, you can't care for the earth. If you can't obtain a yield, you can't care for people. If you can't obtain a yield, you can't return the surplus or give out a fair share, however you want to think about it. And so obtaining the yield is vital for this whole thing to work. But by observing and interacting and catching and storing energy, you should be able to obtain a yield. Fourth principle, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. You want things to be able to run themselves. And so, a self-regulating, this is an example of it's like let's see here, bell siphons. If you're doing hydroponics in a greenhouse for whatever reason, bell siphons, God, I wish there was a better. Bell siphons at work in a hydroponic system are an example of self-regulation. What bell siphons allow for. Oh, come on, really? All right, here we are. Bell siphons are automated siphons that allow water to get up to a certain level within a growing bed, and then they automatically drain completely down and then allow the bed to fill back up again with water. It works great in hydroponic systems where you want a flow of water through the system. You don't want it hanging around too long or you'll cause root rot, but it has to be there to allow the plants to absorb water, and the system is self-regulating. If the water doesn't fill up to a certain point, the siphon doesn't drain. Once the siphon drains, it can't drain again until the thing's full. Self-regulating. And then accept feedback. Self-regulation also applies to yourself. Be disciplined. And systems will give you feedback. If things aren't working properly, you'll know. And then you can fine-tune those aspects in order to make sure that it becomes self-regulating. Okay. Principle 5, use and value renewable resources and services. The best way that I've ever heard this put was a guy named Larry Santoyo. He was at the Toby Hemingway Permaculture Design course that I took. Larry, let's see if I can find a picture of him. Larry Santoyo. This guy right here. Crazy little guy. Not a little guy. He's got a lot of stuff. He's got a lot of stuff going on. Here you go. Strive to make your handprint exceed the size of your footprint. That's another one of his Larryisms. That was really cool. But one of the things he said was, in relation to this principle of renewable resources, you don't use up the sun by sitting in the shade. Or by using the shade, you don't use up the sun. Another one is, here, let's see, water cycle. Yeah, everyone's familiar with the water cycle, right? You got, this is this is the water cycle. I think is a good example of, you know, having observed nature and applying the principles that you see from the water cycle to your design. Um, it catches and stores energy. The sun causes precipitation, clouds form, you obtain a yield. Water storage, water is also, the storage energy of water is stored in ice and snow. The yield is the annual precipitation, um, self-regulation. This is completely self-regulating. The more sun there is, the more evaporation there is, the more clouds that appear, which means that the sun, at a certain point, the sun no longer causes evaporation. It's very, very nice. But that's a good example of a renewable resources. Natural rainfall is an example of a renewable resource. And so one of the things that you see in a lot of permaculture systems is rain catchment. Rain catchment where the water is to be used on the property. You don't just hoard the rain. Um, you don't, you don't send it somewhere else. You harvest it, you store it, you use it. And that's one of the, um, water is a wonderful renewable resource that should be valued. But also in here, think services. One of the, one of the things that people don't think about is coffee. In Washington State, there's a lot of coffee roasters, coffee shops, what have you, and there's a lot in every state really. So, but what these coffee roasters have, they have, and coffee shops have, they're two things that are renewable services. One of which is coffee grounds, the other which is coffee bags. Both of those things are usually given away for free as a service. And it's as long as people are drinking coffee, that will be a renewable resource and a renewable service. So a lot of times permaculture folks, they'll go and get coffee grounds to use in their compost. They'll go and get coffee bags to use as sheet mulch. I know I use that. I use coffee bags in the community garden that I run. I manage through my church. I encourage people to go and pick those up whenever possible. We have a big stack of them, just kind of waiting for people to lay out and use. Another renewable service. Arborists. Um, arborists go do tree trimming. They cut down trees and they chip up all of that wood into wood chips, and they have to pay to dispose of that. But a lot of people don't know that they'll actually give it away. If you Most arborists have a call list, and if you're in their area when they're have a job, they will bring you a load of wood chips, no charge, because you're saving them money. So, you know, renewable in terms of renewableness, uh, as long as there's arborists trimming trees for people and cutting down trees, there's going to be free wood chips for your garden. Okay, next principle: produce no waste. Um, let's see here. All right. One of the phrases that pops up in permaculture is one thing's garbage is another thing's food. And so the symbol for this one is appropriately a worm, because worms eat our garbage and turn it into great soil that you can then use in your garden. Um, so, but one of the things that try to do is, let's see here, okay, is we live, our current culture is everything is disposable, and so you go and you buy something at the store, it comes in a packaging, and then you throw the packaging away and it goes to the landfill. So what if you could find creative uses for that waste? Now, some of it you can't. It's just garbage. But let's see here. Plastic, recycling. Oh, let's see here. Oh, there's just search for it on YouTube whenever you get the chance. There's these guys that they sell plans for people to build their own plastic extruders. Let's see here. And out of those out of those extruded pieces, here's an example. Yep, extruded beams from plastic waste. You get these usable materials that you can then make into things. And so, that's a way to use up plastic, which is, one of the most abundant and actually almost indefinitely reusable garbages that we produce currently. Um, other examples of let me back up. So, what I learned in both of my permaculture courses was you want to get as many uses out of a thing before it is thrown away. And so it's called from source to sink. Uh, from the natural resource to the sink, sinking it back into the environment in the form of a landfill or what have you. And so there's, let's see here. You want to just sort of use a thing as many times as possible before you discard it permanently. And so, if it's an organic material, if it's food scraps, you give it to your chickens or you compost it or you use it for like plant dyes or something like that before you compost it, and then you compost all the dyes. And then don't just compost it, vermicompost it so that you can feed worms, and then you get worms and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and find as many uses as you can for a thing before it's gone. And so in that way, you can produce no waste. There's also what's called a needs and yields analysis, but I won't get into that today. That's more of a design consideration when trying to put elements of a system together. And it's called, closing waste loops is sort of the shorthand for that. Okay, design principle number 7: design from patterns to details. If you're listening to this, you're probably a bear, and so you follow Big Bear himself, and he always talks about pattern recognition. Patterns in nature. Let's see here. There, I'll just leave this up and just slowly scroll through it. All kinds of patterns in nature. Just repeating repeating patterns, there's branching patterns, spiral patterns. Here, yeah, spiral pattern, branching pattern, radiating pattern. Oh, where's a good example of a fractal? I mean, I guess this is a good example of a fractal. You know, the big shape looks like the small shape, and then the smaller part of the smaller shape looks like that shape, and down it goes. But there's all kinds of patterns in nature, and you know, what is it? Let's see here. Lungs look like trees. Yeah, so if you look at some, let's see here, lungs. You know, you got, here's some lungs. It's for filtering air out of filtering oxygen out of the environment. Tree branches. You know, and then there's that, you know, looks like some brachials, you know, shoot, shoot. It's virtually identical, and they serve similar purposes. And so, um, but once you can see patterns, and here's another good pattern. Okay, here's a pattern, right? Water is taken up by the sun. It forms clouds. It condenses. It rains. It snows. Then it comes down and it soaks in, and then it flows down to the ocean. Then it goes back up again, right? I mean, that's a pattern. The details then would be, well, I'm going to set something up to catch the rain. I'm going to set something up to encourage evaporation. You know, I'm going to dig my well in this spot here because it'll be easier to hit water. Those sorts of things. So from patterns to details. And that helps you to stay on focus. If you go from details to try to go the other direction, it's going to turn into a big pile of crap. I know this from experience. It's so much easier when you when you go from patterns to details instead of trying to go from saying, well, I want this, this, and this. And then try to shoehorn it in. It's better if you say, okay, this is the general pattern of the property. And then you see what can fit. And if you do that, the design almost makes itself. Um, but I'll get into that more later. Integrate rather than segregate. Um, so you want to, for a functioning system, 5 parts. There is Donella Meadows thinking in systems. This is a great book for just thinking in terms of systems and how things sort of interact with one another. One of the interesting things that I discovered when kind of skimming this book and taking the class with Toby Hemingway was that the minimum number of elements you need in a system for it to be a self-supporting system are 5. You want at least 5 elements to create a closed system. And so that's a good rule of thumb. If you can have 5 different things working together that are supportive of each other, it's probably going to result in a resilient system. Let's see what else. There's also a thing that's called, let's see here. There are, whenever you're dealing with systems, individual parts may act predictably in a certain way and give you predictable outcomes whenever they're functioning. But when you start putting them together, you start to get what are called emergent properties, things that come out of the synergy of everything working together that are unexpected. But they can either be an unpleasant surprise or a pleasant surprise. And so that's something to watch out for, but you don't get that unless you put the pieces together. And so trying to integrate things together rather than keep everything nice and separate is the name of the game. Okay. Use small and slow solutions. I work, don't want to dox myself here, but I work in water treatment. And so one of the principles that we use in water treatment is the same thing. Use small and slow solutions. Whenever you're making changes to the treatment process, you don't want to do too many things too quickly, or you don't know what is affecting what. And so, and there's also, people have the ability to make changes faster than nature can react. And so we'll start to make some changes, and nature's going to go along and do its own thing. And we won't know how it's reacting until we're well on our merry way, and then things could be at odds with one another. The same thing's true within organizations. You don't want to do things too quickly because there's things that are going to be happening behind the scenes, uh, in parallel to what's going on, and you could end up with things with different aspects that are at odds with one another. And so don't think too big. Do things small and do things slow. And if you do that and you combine it with the previous one and the previous one, integrate rather than separate and design from patterns to details, things actually move fairly quickly, even though you yourself are moving slowly. Slow is also it's sustainable in a way. Again, let's see here, the water cycle, right? There's, the daily water cycle, and then there's the annual water cycle. And then there's, the biennial water cycle. And then there's the, once a decade water cycle. These things they move in patterns and they move slowly. The other thing that you want to do, the reason for using small and slow solutions is you want to be able to observe, and I kind of already touched on that. But if you move faster than the natural pace is, you're going to miss something, and then you're going to have to go back and redo something, or you're going to just end up doing a whole bunch of work that you don't need to do, just because um, yeah, you're chasing your tail, as it were. You also note that some of the institutions that maybe we don't like so much, something like, say, bureaucracies or what have you, they use small and slow solutions. They move at glacial speed, and as a result, they are very resilient because they're not going to be pushed around. They're not going to be pushed into changes. Very, very resilient, and they can often outlast attempts to reform them. The same thing can be, if you apply that principle to the system that you're designing, the same result will occur. Okay. Number 10, use and value diversity. Let's see here. Monoculture versus polyculture. I don't know if they were, there was some liberal nonsense going on here with this in terms of the people element. But in agriculture, at least, there's advantages and disadvantages to monoculture versus polyculture. Monocultures tend to be less resilient. You think about things like famines or what have you that have taken place. Like the potato famine in Ireland. There was the wheat rust that caused like the Dust Bowl in the Dust Bowls in the middle of America and stuff like that, because all the wheat was wiped out. Um, those are the more glaring ones, and so they don't lead to a very resilient system. Polyculture, on the other hand, um, any single event is less likely to completely wipe everything out, and then the system can recover. And you know, as it is, valuing diversity, there is something to be said for learning from different cultures, even if it's learning what not to do. And so you can value it and you can use it even if you don't want to, even if it goes completely against what makes for a stable society. This is probably the one point that I have the most contention with in terms of a design principle. For designing a system, it doesn't work very well with care of people. It actually leads to the degradation of the system over time, because ironically, when it comes to the people element, it's not a slow, small solution. It's a relatively fast and large solution. Anyways, moving on. Use edges and value the marginal. One of the principles in permaculture is edge. And let's see here. Forest, meadow, images. Let's see here if I can find a good example of edge. One of the. Come on now, where is it? Where's a good one? Here we are. This is a good one. Let's see here. Nope. I just wanna. All right. Computer's being stupid. Here we are. So this one's a bit abrupt, but you can kind of see it. Here back in the forest, you have the nice big tall trees, and then as you get to the edge, you get this shrubby stuff that just kind of pops up. And then at the edge, then you have this meadow happening here. Let's see here. Forest to meadow. Come on, let's get a better picture of it so I can really nail this home. Here we are. This one's a really good one. So you can see how on the edge, it's a transition zone. there's in the forest, you're likely to have just a bunch of tall stuff that shades out the smaller stuff. But then when you get to the edge, suddenly there's an opportunity for other things to grow. And then it transitions into something else, i.e. the meadow. You will find that at that edges are where the edges of things, where things come together. And you can, do this experiment, this thought experiment for yourself. Um, wherever with whatever examples you want to use. But where two things come together, there's an edge formed, and that's when stuff happens. That's when activity occurs. That's where the most activity and change and potential occurs. And so utilizing edges either to increase potential or decrease potential, valuing the marginal, value the things that appear when two things come together as an emergent property, as part of the integration of things. Those emergent properties that come out, learn to see them and learn to value them and use them. And then finally, creatively use and respond to change. So this last one, stay limber. Things change um, as you're putting all of these things into practice. Things are going to be dynamic, and if you set out with the mindset that, well, I'm just going to do this and nothing's going to change, you're going to end up you're more going to end up let's get a bigger. You're going to end up with this instead of this. So, I don't even want to say that both have their purpose, because they don't. God, I need a better picture of a monoculture. They're making them all small so that I can't show how ridiculous they are. Here we are. Alright, you guys can see that one just fine. But you can either have this, or you can have this. This has its advantages, and this has its advantages. But this is not resilient, nearly as resilient as this. This requires lots of input and tending and effort to maintain. This maintains itself with a little bit of, let's just say, some creative pruning from the human element at work. And that's about it for this stream. If you're watching this and you have any questions or what have you, I know it's a big topic, and there's a lot of information just presented here, but I have found, just to kind of bring this home, in as a Christian, in all of my searching for something that was tangible and real, this permaculture, although it was created by non-religious people, in a sense to, sort of in the liberal technocratic way, sort of shape things in our image, make things in the human image instead of living in God's image. Because it is based in observing God's world, this comes the closest to probably doing things God's way, in a strange way. And just as a, I fully believe that God intended for people to not live as we live now, but to live in a way that was close to nature. I think that one of the best examples, just live naturally and interact with the creation. I think that one of the best examples of this is actually from Lord of the Rings. I was watching I always enjoy watching Stefan Molyneux's shows. Not always, but once in a while, whenever, especially when he does interviews. And he was interviewing someone. He's interviewed him a few times, but he's an expert on Tolkien, and he runs an online school. The man's a Christian, and so I've actually looked into that a little bit, and I think I'm going to look into that a little bit further, especially as my kids get a little older and are going to be needing to go to school. I'm going to look into that as an option for them to attend some of those online classes. Um, but the guy made the point that in Lord of the Rings there is no religion. In the stories, no one has a religion. They're either living in harmony. They're either living in harmony with the world, or they're living in dissonance to the world. They're either living in harmony with the plan, or they're living in dissonance to the plan. And we have to remember, you know, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it to the glory of God. And I don't think that God intended for us to have churches and to have cathedrals and churches and the super rigid structure of modern modern day Christianity, or even the Christianity of the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church or what have you. This rigid structure that you have to, get together and come to a building and pay money for the upkeep and all this stuff. And I can go into this in another stream at a different time. But I think that God really just wanted us that every day was to be church, because we'd be living in the world that He made for us. Just living in the world that He made for us, living as He made us to live. And I think that a lot of, homesteading, gardening, um, getting back to the land, and using permaculture to help is in keeping with that original purpose. Now, I don't think for a moment that, if we all just decide to start living that way, that it's in any way going to fix the world or even fix us. We're broken, and the final solution is the return of Christ, um, to bring fire and destroy the world and make it anew, take His people to live with Him, and cast aside those who wanted nothing to do with Him. And it's just my personal opinion, but I think in heaven we're going to be doing a lot of gardening. So, um, with that, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Um, Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to check us out on Instagram, Men Without a Nation, menwithoutanation.blogspot.com, and of course the YouTube channel for live streams, and then the good old replay of the videos. Um, Thank you very much. Have a good night. Take care, and God bless.